Stage Wanderer here, and welcome to episode 14 of Unmasking the Dark Side, Sex Magic. So, I would like to talk first about NXIVM. If you're not aware of NXIVM, look for the playlist on my channel titled NXIVM, and in there you will find a pretty detailed series of videos explaining what NXIVM is. I'm going to recap a little bit, but if you really want to know about the foundation and genesis of what I'm talking about, you'll need to go back and see those previous videos, or have an understanding on your own of what NXIVM was and is involved in. So, but as a recap, a high IQ'd self-proclaimed genius named Keith Raniere is the founder of this, and along with a woman named Allison Mack, who was a small-time actress in the WB series Smallville, and how they together were recruiting young starlets from Hollywood and branding them as sex slaves. Now, this leads me to what I'm talking about today, is about a recent story that is circulating on the internet by a man named Szemkus, and that's spelled S-Z-E-M-K-U-S. Benjamin Szemkus. Thanks to a viewer for tipping me off to this earlier in the morning, and I have been researching this all day because Ben claims back in 2007, back in February of 2007, that he attended a NXIVM recruitment mixer with his girlfriend, and they were both college students at the time. And this party was mainly a recruitment party for a bunch of college girls, specifically out of Yale and some other surrounding colleges. The girlfriend was invited, and he kind of came along as her plus one. And he tells his story on the internet. You can find his story in its completeness in the liked section playlist on my channel. You'll see it there. The thing that sticks out the most in the NXIVM recruitment party is the guest list, which I'll get into in a moment. But he claims that the people were broken up into small groups that he was not allowed to participate in. Only the girls were allowed to participate in that portion, where they would huddle around in small groups around computer screens and watch snuff films. And I'll get into a little bit later about that, but that's very disturbing. And also the guest list is kind of interesting. The NXIVM people you would expect to be there were there, of course. Keith Raniere, Allison Mack, the Smallville actress, another person, Nancy Salzman, she's connected to it, and then interestingly enough, a New York State Senator named Eric Schneiderman. Also, Anthony Weiner, and his wife, Uma Haberdine, were apparently in attendance, and Ben Szemkus claims to have spoken to them. Also was, I think it's Jason or Jonathan Alefantis, the Alefantis guy from Comet Pizza. He was at this party as well. James Alefantis, that's it, James. And then, interestingly enough, Stormy Daniels apparently was appearing there as well, and was a part of this evening event. Now, I really tend to believe Ben and his story about this party, because mainly the strongest evidence for me is his description of Stormy Daniels. I actually met Stormy Daniels in 2009, and I was in attendance at a big event party where she appeared, and I got to speak to her when she signed a poster with Storm, had lightning and thunder, and she was in a cowgirl outfit, and she's Stormy, and I think that's what it was like. Anyway, I remember the thunder and lightning, but she signed it, and I got to speak with her momentarily, and I get a sense for people when I talk to them, especially other entertainers. And some of the most really what's the word I'm looking for, powerful and outgoing and confident people in the world on stage are oftentimes very reclusive and quiet and stay to themselves whenever they're out in public or at the merch table, or when you meet them in a restaurant or just casually, in the studio or whatever. Their stage personality is very different. And that's the case with Stormy Daniels. She was almost awkward. She was very shy. And this guy, Ben, he goes into detail about that encounter and how he shared a smoke with her out on the patio. And it seems like to me that he met her because his encounter and my encounter were very similar in nature. And he described it in a very similar way. So you've got this party with all of these people that have been connected to various different scandals, sex crimes. Some of them are tied to child trafficking. Anthony Weiner is a convicted child pedophile. He got put in prison for sending pics to little girls. And, Allison Mack and Keith Raniere are both under arrest and being charged with false imprisonment and sexual blackmail and all kinds of things. And But, this guy, Ben, a lot of people are talking about him. It's kind of a small story right now, but I'm feeling it grow more and more as people get the word out. But he disappeared a few days ago, and a lot of people feared that Ben had been killed. And in his initial video, you can clearly see an a semi-automatic pistol laying on his nightstand behind him as kind of a silent witness to his own fear and his own preparedness, because he understands someone might come for him. So a few days ago, he disappeared, and everyone was afraid he'd been killed. But I have it on good information and from a reliable source that seems to have been following him all along and in contact with him, who claims that he went into hiding, that there has been this publicist who has taken it upon himself to try and discredit Ben and his claims about this party mixer. And we figure he probably works for NXIVM, and it's their job to discredit this guy. And he doxed him and published his home address. And so rightfully so, Ben split and is currently safe and well and in hiding. So I believe that all of this behavior is it's related to MK Ultra. It's the kind of the showing of the snuff films, the sexual dominance, the enslavement, the melon twisting that's going on here is almost like a light version of MK Ultra. And I think what we're seeing is the very introductory and the very first phases of the Monarch sex kitten training program for young women to create these sex slaves for the rich and famous to use and abuse at their will. And that's what this is about. It's the very beginning of that training, which goes much deeper until they can almost use this same kind of torture and imagery and mind melding and fracturing and creating new personalities and personas to create these Mata Hari type of spies, like maybe Stormy Daniels. Don't. Is she MK Ultra? She's got all the earmarks for it. So, the MK Ultra connection is manifested in this doctor who was also charged, and his medical license was revoked for using mind control techniques against people's will. In other words, restraining people and forcing them to watch these snuff films. And it does break down the moral responses, and when you do that to people, it makes them less sensitive to murder. So they could witness an actual snuff in reality without throwing up. Because nothing screws up a snuff party like puking. I know that's gross. I can't believe I just said it, but I'm not making light. I'm just saying it's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing, the things that may very well be going on in these Hollywood gatherings and parties. So what is it about the NXIVM teachings? What is that all about? They claim it's a pathway to personal empowerment for women through sexual surrender. And they claim that the woman's traditional power base is based in surrender or the submissive role. And that through that submissive role, they can engage in manipulation of people through sexual domination and addiction by playing both sides of the S&M sadomasochistic elements. They can use that to control people. And actually, the there is a belief that there's this ritualistic, sacrificial way to possess power through the practice of sexual skills and ritualistic surrender and sexual ritual. And so I also believe that these people are using these MK Ultra sex slaves as currency and trading them back and forth once they're trained up. And a lot of this is going back to what we call spirit cooking or sex magic. And this was really started by a guy named Aleister Crowley, or Crowley. I think Crowley is probably how most people pronounce it. Aleister Crowley was considered the most wicked man to have ever lived. He was a preacher's kid, and you know what they say about preacher's kids? We're the worst. So in his case, he may have been the reason people say that. But anyway, he was a preacher's kid, but his father died when he was only 11 years old. And this left him bitter against God for taking his father away. It left him kind of half trained up in life, and his mother was forced to take over his training, and she enforced her Puritan morality upon him in a really dominating way, which caused him to rebel. She lost control of him. He became obsessed with the occult and demonology, and when he was a young man, he entered into a guild of magicians and sorcerers known as the Golden Dawn. The Golden Dawn had some pretty notable members, some literary giants like Yeats and Bram Stoker, the creator of the Count Dracula mythology. So Crowley, during this period, he adopted a new evil moniker. He started calling himself and demanded that other people call him Beast 666. So apparently he changed his name to Beast 666. And this was just, I think, an embodiment of his personal desire to rebel as far away from his puritanical Christian raising as possible. So at this point, he becomes obsessed with black magic, and he finds the Golden Dawn to be kind of like the kiddie pool of magic. And since they're just kind of toying with it, they're too nice, they're too good, they're involved in child's play, and he abandons them for a more aggressive pathway of demon conjuring, which I believe led to his possession by multiple entities. In fact, his wife and him honeymooned in Egypt. And his wife, Rose, went with him to an exhibit of some of these Egyptology items. And when they came to the display numbered 666, which was a display containing Horus and his mythology, and Rose began to manifest Horus, and Horus had a conversation with Aleister Crowley, and he channeled through Rose apparently until Crowley was quite disturbed by all of this and wanted Rose back and thought maybe he'd lost her for good or she'd lost her mind because she was being possessed by this demon. But Crowley kept pursuing that experience for himself until he eventually became demon possessed and proudly would channel demons and write books through them. And his main book is called The Book of the Law. And in that book is the concept that is alive and well today in Hollywood and members of the left. And you see this on t-shirts, and it's do what thou wilt, or do what thou will, or do what you want, or do what you will. In other words, if you will it, do it, without regard to what's right or wrong or other people's feelings. And that this idea of the ultimate narcissism being the pathway to spiritual enhancement was something that Crowley claimed in this book and has spread down through our society like a poison. And, you know, there's this notorious story where Crowley was mountain climbing, and he was at the bottom of the hill in the base camp, and he had his tent off to the side, kind of away from the group, and he was drinking tea when he heard an avalanche occur with dozens of men who had got caught in the avalanche. And the mountain of snow comes all the way down the mountain until it's almost right next to the tent of Crowley, and you have all of these buried and half-buried men, and they're all screaming for mercy and begging for their lives, and he's the only able-bodied person in the group that was not wiped out by this. And instead of helping anyone, he sat there and drank his tea and listened to them intently as they all slowly perished. Wow! And he called that experience the most liberating experience of his life. So now you can see why this guy was so wicked, some of the things he did. So Crowley then later forsaked his own wife for a gay relationship with his black magic apprentice. And he and his male apprentice engaged in sadism and masochism. They did a lot of drugs like cocaine, opium, and hash. And in a moment of epiphany, while he was engaged in a ritualistic act of sodomy on his assistant in the desert in Egypt, he was involved in a ritual in that moment, trying to conjure up Satan himself, when the idea of sex magic came to him, and he gave birth to this doctrine that is now kind of the in and hip thing in Hollywood and higher levels of government. So Crowley started a cult after he had this experience, a cult based in sexual hedonism and sexual excesses and torture and sadomasochism and all of it. Bondage and discipline and everything was included here, and all tied in with occultic spiritual behavior and actions and rituals. A lot of black magic. So he started a thing called the Abbey of Thelema in Sicily, and there was a lot of drug-fueled satanic orgies, animal and human sacrifices, imprisonment and torture, blood drinking, self-mutilation and cutting. They had a thing called a nightmare room, and the walls were decorated in these murals that had images of Crowley on the wall performing acts of sex and torture on people. And they were forced to take drugs and stare at these images for hours in isolation. And it very much starts to sound like MK Ultra training and the MK Ultra programming. And they engaged in spirit cooking and mixtures of blood and semen and other bodily fluids with herbs to create different spells and with different outcomes. And they did all of this until the abbey was forcibly closed when local Sicilian authorities were tipped off to what was going on out there when one of Crowley's disciples died from an infection from drinking cat blood. Whew! That's the darkest of the dark side right there. Gosh, I almost hated making this video. But this sex magic is something now that has spread into Hollywood. This Abramovich woman, that many of you have heard about, she is directly connected to people like Jay-Z and Beyonce, to people that like John Podesta and Tony Podesta, who have close lifelong ties with Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. And you start to see all of this interconnection between Hollywood, the rich and famous of the Blue Bloods, the leaders, the movers and shakers, the industrialists, the mega rich, and all of our leaders, and how all of this has been compromised. And once again, we see manifesting today this evil that has somehow survived down through time. So thank you for your time, and join me next time as we delve deeper, unmasking the dark side.